The cafe was packed. The kind of place where self-proclaimed intellectuals gather to sip overpriced lattes while debating the patriarchy and invisible structures of oppression. In the far corner, a woman stood with an air of defiance, her short-dyed hair and slogan-covered tote bag marking her as the leader of the discussion. Her voice, loud and confident, carried through the cafe as she passionately lectured a group of wide-eyed college students about toxic masculinity. At the opposite end of the cafe, leaning casually against the counter, was a man who didn't belong in this world of soft voices and passive-aggressive outrage. He didn't wear tight jeans or oversized glasses. His presence was different. Calm, self-assured, uninterested in validation. Logan Grant, the definition of a Sigma male. Tall built and dressed in nothing more than a fitted black t-shirt and jeans, he radiated quiet confidence. He wasn't part of conversation, but he could hear it, and it was grating. You see, the feminist leader, Emily Crawford, was saying, the male-dominated structure of our society has led to an ingrained privilege that men, especially white men, refuse to acknowledge. A murmur of agreement followed. Logan sighed. He had no intention of getting involved. He never did. Life was too short to argue with people who weren't interested in the truth. But then it happened. "Excuse me." Emily's voice rang out, sharper this time. Logan looked up. She was staring directly at him, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "You've been standing there for a while," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have something to add? Or are you just another silent beneficiary of male privilege?" The cafe went quiet. A few people shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Logan exhaled, tilting his head slightly as if deciding whether this was worth his time. Then he smiled, slowly. "Let me guess," he said, his voice even controlled. "You dragged me into this because I happen to be a guy standing within earshot. That's equality, right? Randomly calling out men." Emily grinned. She had been waiting for this. "It's not random. You're part of the system, whether you acknowledge it or not." Logan chuckled. "That's cute. You assume I give a damn about the system." Her smile faltered slightly. "If you really didn't, you wouldn't be reacting this way." Logan glanced around, noting the intrigued faces watching the exchange. He sighed, shaking his head. "All right, let's play your game. What exactly is it that I benefit from?" Emily straightened, her confidence returning. "Where do I start? The wage gap, workplace discrimination, the fact that women constantly live in fear of men. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to navigate the world knowing that at any moment a man could—" Logan held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I get it. You've got your speech ready. Problem is, you're spouting nonsense." A gasp rippled through the room. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Logan leaned against the counter, unfazed. "The wage gap? Disproven. Men work longer hours, take more dangerous jobs, and don't leave the workforce for extended periods. Look up statistics instead of repeating Tumblr posts." Emily's face flushed. "That's completely." "As for workplace discrimination," Logan continued, ignoring her, "you know what the most dangerous, low-paying, thankless jobs in society are? Coal miners, garbage collectors, oil rig workers, all dominated by men. Funny, I don't see women protesting for equal representation in those fields." Someone in the crowd let out a low whistle. Emily clenched her jaw. "That's different. Those jobs are hard." Logan interjected. "Dangerous? Unappealing?" "Exactly." Emily's hands curled into fists. "And what about women feeling unsafe? Every woman I know has a story about a man making her feel uncomfortable." Logan's expression didn't change. "Do you know what gender is more likely to be the victim of violent crime? Man. Do you know who's more likely to be homeless? Man. Who works the most dangerous jobs? Man. Who dies more in war? Man. But sure, tell me more about how you feel unsafe because a guy looked at you on the subway." The cafe had gone dead silent. Even the barista had stopped pretending to wipe the counter. Emily was fuming now. "You're unbelievable. This is exactly what I mean. Men refuse to listen." I'm listening, Logan said. I just don't tolerate bad arguments. See, the difference between you and me is that I base my opinions on facts, not feelings. Emily scoffed, rolling her eyes. Of course, the classic logic over emotions nonsense. Just another way men belittle women's experiences. Logan chuckled. I don't belittle women's experiences. I belittle bad reasoning. Huge difference. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but Logan wasn't interested anymore. He had already won. He picked up his coffee from the counter, giving her one last glance. Enjoy the echo chamber, he said before walking toward the door. As he left, a few people actually clapped. Others whispered. And Emily? She stood there red-faced, knowing deep down that for the first time in a long time, someone had just beaten her at her own game. But the battle wasn't over, because Emily wasn't about to let this be the end. Logan Grant had no intention of seeing Emily Crawford again. Debating radical feminists wasn't exactly his idea of a productive afternoon. He preferred his peace, his gym, his work, his books. He had built his life around independence, avoiding unnecessary drama. But the world, as always, had other plans. 2 days later, he found himself in an upscale bookstore, scanning through a selection of philosophy books. Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, the kind of reading material that aligned with his worldview. The store was quiet, filled with the scent of fresh paper and espresso from the cafe inside. Then he heard it, that voice. And that's why dismantling the patriarchy isn't just about empowering women. It's about freeing men, too. Toxic masculinity traps men in roles they don't want, forcing them into rigid standards of success and suppressing their emotions. Logan sighed. Emily Crawford. She stood near the store's small event stage, speaking into a microphone, addressing a crowd of about 30 people, mostly college students and a few older feminists nodding along in agreement. Behind her, a banner read, Feminist Perspectives, a new future for gender equality. Logan shook his head, flipping through his book, trying to ignore it. But then he felt eyes on him. He glanced up. Emily was staring right at him, a slow smirk forming on her lips. Well, she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with amusement. Looks like we have a familiar face in the crowd. The audience turned, following her gaze. Logan sighed again, closing his book. Here we go. I was just talking about toxic masculinity, Emily continued, and it seems like fate has brought us an example. A few people chuckled. Logan folded his arms, unfazed. Emily leaned against the podium, her confidence growing. Tell me, Logan, since you had so much to say the other day, would you like to share your thoughts now? Or are you only bold when you can walk away? Murmurs of anticipation spread through the room. Logan could have ignored it, could have walked out without a word, but that wasn't his style. He stepped forward. The crowd shifted as he approached, some looking excited, others nervous. Emily straightened, her smirk widening. Logan took the mic from the stand without asking. He let a silent stretch, commanding the room without effort. Then, in a calm, even voice, he said, I don't debate people who argue with emotions instead of facts, but I'll make an exception today. The room tensed. Emily crossed her arms. Oh, please, enlighten us. Logan took a step forward, locking eyes with her. You claim toxic masculinity traps men in rigid roles. And yet, when a man embraces strength, logic, and independence, feminists like you label it toxic. Emily scoffed. It is toxic when it suppresses emotional intelligence and forces men into unrealistic expectations. Logan tilted his head. Men built civilization by embracing those expectations. Strength, discipline, the ability to endure hardship. Without those, we wouldn't have cities, technology, or even bookstores like this one for you to hold your little lectures in. A murmur ran through the crowd. Emily rolled her eyes. Typical, glorifying male suffering while ignoring the cost. Do you know how many men are miserable because they're expected to be strong all the time? Logan's expression remained unreadable. Do you know how many women respect weak men? Silence. Emily's mouth opened, then closed. Logan continued, voice steady. The truth is, men are expected to be strong. because strength protects, provides, and builds. And despite what you claim, women don't want weak men. They say they do until they don't. Emily shook her head, regaining her composure. That's just your opinion. Logan smirked. No, that's biology. Women are drawn to competence and confidence. That's why you called me out today. You're not used to men who don't seek approval. A few gasps. Some of the audience members glanced at Emily. Her face reddened slightly. That's ridiculous. Logan leaned in slightly, his tone softer but sharper. Then why do you keep trying to prove something to me? The silence was deafening. Emily clenched her jaw. You are so unbelievably arrogant. Logan chuckled. No, I just don't pretend weakness is a virtue. The crowd didn't know where to look. Some nodded subtly, while others watched Emily, waiting for her next move. She straightened, taking a breath. You know what? I'll admit it, Logan. You're confident. You know how to argue. But at the end of the day, you're just another man afraid to admit that the world is changing. The patriarchy is dying. And men like you, you're relics. Logan let her words hang in the air for a moment. Then he smiled. Emily, he said, the only thing dying is the respect men have for women like you. A few quiet gasps. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Logan continued, his voice cool and measured. You claim to fight for equality, but all you do is blame men for your problems. And the more you push this victim mentality, the less men are listening. You know what's really changing? Men are walking away. Emily forced a laugh. Walking away from what? From you, Logan said simply. From relationships where they're treated as disposable. From marriages where they're expected to provide while being disrespected. From a society that tells them their achievements are privilege and their struggles don't matter. The room had gone completely silent. Logan set the microphone back on the stand. You can keep lecturing men about how oppressive we are, but don't be surprised when fewer and fewer of us care to listen. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. The bookstore was dead quiet as the door swung shut behind him. And Emily, she had no comeback. Because for the first time in her life, she realized she was losing. Emily Crawford didn't sleep well that night. Logan Grant had humiliated her twice. First at the cafe, then in front of an entire bookstore crowd. And the worst part? She had no counterargument. He didn't just dismiss her points. He dismantled them with ruthless efficiency, like someone who knew they were right. She hated that. She hated the way he spoke, like he wasn't trying to convince anyone. Because he didn't need to, like he wasn't seeking approval. Because he didn't care. Emily had debated dozens of men before. Politicians, professors, activists, and every single time, she had them on the defensive. But Logan, he was different, unshaken, detached, and it terrified her. She needed a rematch, not a spontaneous debate like before. No, this time she would be prepared. So she did what any self-respecting feminist leader would do. She set up a debate. The setup, a week later, the flyers were everywhere. Public debate, gender roles and equality. Emily Crawford versus Logan Grant. Friday night, Emerson Hall Auditorium. She wasn't sure he'd accept, but she sent an official invitation to his email anyway. And to her surprise, he replied within minutes. See you there. No negotiation. No questions. Just raw confidence. By the time Friday night arrived, the 500-seat auditorium was packed. Students, journalists, activists, and even casual spectators had come to see the battle unfold. Social media buzzed with anticipation. Emily stood backstage, dressed sharply in a fitted blazer and slacks, rehearsing her points. She had refined her arguments, backed them up with statistics, prepared for any counterpoint Logan might throw at her. She was ready, or so she thought, because when Logan Grant walked onto that stage, she felt it again, that unshakable presence. Dressed in nothing but a black Henley and jeans, hands casually in his pockets, Logan didn't look like a man walking into a fight. He looked like a man walking into a foregone conclusion. The debate begins. The moderator, a nervous professor, cleared his throat. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's debate. Each speaker will have 5 minutes, for an opening statement. Ms. Crawford, you may begin. Emily stepped forward, gripping the podium. Thank you, she began, scanning the crowd. We are here tonight because inequality still exists. Because despite the progress we've made, men still hold a disproportionate amount of power in politics, business, and society as a whole. Because women are still paid less of the same work. Because the system is still rigged in favor of men. The audience applauded. She continued. Toxic masculinity doesn't just harm women, it harms men, too. It forces men into roles they don't want, discourages emotional vulnerability, and leads to higher rates of male suicide and violence. Feminism isn't about attacking men, it's about freeing them. And yet, men like my opponent resist it. Why? Because they fear losing the unearned advantages they've enjoyed for centuries. More applause. Emily smiled, stepping back confidently. The moderator turned to Logan. Mr. Grant, your opening statement? Logan approached the podium, but instead of gripping it, he simply leaned against it with one hand relaxed. He looked at the crowd, silent for a moment. Then he spoke. No. A murmur of confusion. Emily frowned. No, what? Logan smiled. No, men don't have unearned advantages. No, the wage gap isn't real. It's a myth when adjusted for hours worked and career choices. No, toxic masculinity isn't the cause of male suffering. Lack of purpose is. No, feminism isn't freeing men. It's shaming them into submission. The room was stunned. Logan took his time, letting his words settle. Then calmly he continued. You claim men hold more power. But power isn't given, it's earned. Men work the most dangerous jobs. They die in wars. They build infrastructure. If you want that kind of power, go out and take it. No one's stopping you. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Logan held up a hand. I'm not finished. She clenched her jaw. Logan turned back to the audience. You claim feminism helps men. It doesn't. If it did, where are the feminist protests against family courts that strip fathers of their children? Against male homelessness? Against men being 80% of suicide victims? Feminism isn't about equality. It's about control. The crowd stirred, some nodding, others whispering. Emily cut in. That's absurd. Feminism does fight for men's issues. Logan raised an eyebrow. Really? Name one feminist movement that prioritizes men. Emily hesitated. Well, Logan smirked. Exactly. Laughter spread through the crowd. Emily's face flushed red. That doesn't mean... Let me finish, Logan interrupted, voice steady. You claim men fear feminism. Wrong. Men aren't afraid of feminism. We're just done with it. We're done apologizing for existing. Done being blamed for problems we didn't cause. Done pretending equality means treating women like perpetual victims. He stepped back from the podium. You say we should do better. I say, he locked eyes with Emily. We're done listening. The aftermath. Silence. Then applause. Loud. Uncontrolled. Emily's stomach twisted. This was supposed to be her moment. She had planned for this. She had statistics. She had research. But Logan? He didn't argue with numbers. He argued with reality. The moderator finally cleared his throat. Ms. Crawford, your response? Emily exhaled sharply, gripping the podium. This debate isn't over. Logan smirked. It was over before it started. She hated him. She hated his smugness, his unshaken confidence, the way he didn't need validation, because he already knew he was right. But most of all, she hated that deep down, she wasn't sure he was wrong. Emily Crawford didn't speak to anyone after the debate. She didn't check social media. She didn't read the articles analyzing the event. She didn't need to. She already knew what they said, that she lost, badly, that Logan Grant had dismantled her arguments with nothing but confidence, facts, and a smirk, that for the first time, a feminist debate had backfired. For days, she stayed off the grid, avoiding the flood of messages, some sympathetic, others mocking. But no matter how much she tried to move on, she couldn't shake one fact. He had beaten her. And deep down, She wasn't sure he was wrong. A final confrontation. 1 week later, Emily was back at the same cafe where it all started. She hadn't planned to see him again, but fate had other plans. She looked up from her laptop and froze. Logan Grant, standing at the counter, waiting for his coffee, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just publicly humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. Emily clenched her jaw. Her first instinct was to ignore him. Her second instinct was to confront him. She went with the second. Standing up, she grabbed her coffee and walked toward him. Logan noticed her before she even spoke. He turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "Ah, Crawford." She exhaled. "I should hate you." Logan smirked. "But you don't." She crossed her arms. "Don't be so sure." Logan took a sip of his coffee, watching her. "You came over here for a reason. So, let's hear it." Emily hesitated. Then finally she said it. "I've been thinking about what you said." Logan leaned back slightly, amused. "And..." Emily bit her lip. "And maybe you were right about some things." For the first time since they met, Logan actually looked surprised. It was subtle, but she caught it. She continued, "I still think feminism fights for real issues. But I also realize that a lot of women don't really want equality. They want power over men. And I hate to admit it, but..." She sighed. "I see it now." Logan studied her, as if deciding whether to believe her. "And the victim mentality?" Emily hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "Yeah, that too." A long silence stretched between them. Then, to her shock, Logan smiled. Not a smirk. Not the arrogant grin he always wore when proving her wrong. A real smile. "You're smarter than I thought," he said simply. Emily rolled her eyes. "Wow. Thanks." Logan chuckled. "You were never stupid. Just misled." She frowned. "So what now?" Logan took another sip of his coffee. "That's up to you. You can keep fighting for a movement that sees men as the enemy, or you can start thinking for yourself." Emily looked down at her cup, deep in thought. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure what she believed anymore. But one thing was certain, Logan Grant had changed her, and she wasn't sure if she hated him for it, or respected him. Maybe both.